Have you ever met someone who changed your life in the most unexpected way? Someone you'd normally walk past without a second glance? Stay with me, because this story will remind you why kindness matters more than anything else in this world. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? I want to see every corner of the world this story reaches. The alarm never went off. That's what Sophie kept telling herself as she jolted awake, her heart hammering in her chest. The room was still dark, but something felt wrong. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, 4:47 a.m. She had 13 minutes before her actual alarm would ring, but her body was already tense, already preparing for another grueling day. Sophie Martinez was 28 years old, but the mirror told a different story. The woman staring back at her looked closer to 40, hollow cheeks, shadows under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and hair that she barely had time to wash, let alone style. She pulled it back into the same messy bun she wore every single day and splashed cold water on her face. The water heater had been broken for 3 days. The landlord kept promising to fix it tomorrow. Tomorrow never came for people like Sophie. In the next room, she could hear her younger brother, Danny, coughing. That wet, rattling cough that had been getting worse for 2 weeks. He was only 16, but he'd been sick on and off for months. Asthma, the free clinic doctor said. He needed an inhaler, medication, regular checkups. All things that cost money Sophie didn't have. She tiptoed to his room and peeked inside. Danny was asleep, curled up under 2 thin blankets, his face flushed with fever. Sophie felt her chest tighten. She'd been saving tips for his medicine, hiding dollar bills in an envelope under her mattress. She had $43 so far. The inhaler cost $75. Just a little more, she told herself. Just a few more days. She closed his door quietly and went to the kitchen. The fridge was nearly empty. Half a carton of eggs, some wilted lettuce, a container of leftover rice from 3 days ago. She cracked 2 eggs into a pan, cooked them with the rice, and left the plate on the counter with a note. Danny, eat this before school. Take the cough syrup, blue bottle. I'll be home by 4. Love you. S. She pulled on her jacket, threadbare at the elbows, missing a button, and wrapped a scarf around her neck. Outside, the Portland rain was relentless, drumming against the pavement in sheets. Sophie didn't have an umbrella. She'd left it on the bus 2 weeks ago and couldn't afford to replace it. The walk to Morningside Diner took 30 minutes. 30 minutes of cold rain soaking through her jacket, her sneakers squelching with every step, her hands shoved deep in her pockets because she'd lost her gloves somewhere between work and home. The streets were empty except for a few early morning delivery trucks and the occasional homeless person huddled in a doorway. Sophie kept her head down and walked faster. Not because she was afraid of them, but because seeing them reminded her how close she was to being in their place. One missed paycheck. One medical emergency. That's all it would take. Morningside Diner sat on the corner of 5th and Hawthorne, a squat brick building with a flickering neon sign that read, "Open 24 hours." It had been Sophie's workplace for the past 2 years, ever since she'd dropped out of community college to take care of Danny after their mom died. Cancer. 3 months from diagnosis to gone. No insurance. No savings. Just medical bills that Sophie was still paying off in tiny, painful increments. She unlocked the back door and stepped inside. The smell hit her immediately, coffee, grease, yesterday's meatloaf. It wasn't unpleasant, just familiar. This place had become more of a home to her than the cramped studio apartment she shared with Danny. Sophie hung her wet jacket in the back room and tied on her apron. The routine began. Start the coffee, wipe down the tables, check the register, prep the condiments. She moved on autopilot, her hands doing the work while her mind churned through worries. Danny's medicine. Rent due in 5 days. The electric bill. That noise the fridge is making. As she was refilling the napkin dispensers, she heard a soft tap on the front window. Sophie froze. It was barely 5:30 in the morning. The diner didn't open until 6. Who would be out there? She looked up and saw a figure standing in the rain. A woman older, maybe in her 60s, wearing a soaked coat and holding a plastic garbage bag. Her gray hair was plastered to her face, and even through the rain-streaked glass, Sophie could see she was shivering. Sophie recognized her immediately. Margaret. She'd been living in the alley behind the diner for the past few months, ever since the city cleared out the homeless camp near the river. Sophie had seen her digging through the dumpster more than once, and each time it made her stomach twist with guilt and helplessness. Sophie walked to the door and unlocked it, opening it just a crack. Ma'am, we're not open yet. I know, honey, Margaret interrupted, her voice hoarse. I'm sorry to bother you. I was wondering if you had any coffee. Just a cup. I can pay. She held out a handful of coins, maybe 60 cents. Sophie looked at the woman's trembling hands, at the dark circles under her eyes that mirrored her own. Wait here, Sophie said softly. She went back to the kitchen, grabbed a large to-go cup, and filled it with fresh coffee. Then she wrapped up 2 blueberry muffins from yesterday's batch. They were supposed to be thrown out anyway, and put them in a paper bag. When she came back, Margaret was still standing in the doorway, rain dripping off her coat onto the floor. Here, Sophie said, handing her the coffee and bag. No charge. Margaret's eyes widened. Oh, honey, I can't. Yes, you can, Sophie said firmly. It's yesterday's stuff. We have to toss it anyway. That was a lie. The owner, Mr. Dalton, had a strict policy. Nothing gets given away. Everything had to be logged, accounted for, thrown in the locked dumpster. He'd fired someone last year for sneaking food to a homeless kid. But Sophie didn't care. Margaret took the coffee and bag with both hands, cradling them like they were made of gold. God bless you, she whispered. You're an angel. Just stay dry, Sophie said. Maybe find a shelter today? It's too cold to be out here. Margaret nodded, though they both knew she probably wouldn't. The shelters were always full, and they didn't let you bring your belongings. That garbage bag Margaret carried? It was probably everything she owned. Sophie watched her shuffle away into the rain, disappearing around the corner. She closed the door, locked it, and went back to work. She didn't know it yet, but that small act of kindness, that single cup of coffee and 2 muffins, would set in motion a chain of events that would save her life. The morning rush hit like a tidal wave. By 7 a.m., every booth was full. Construction workers ordering stacks of pancakes and bacon. Office workers grabbing coffee and bagels to go. Regulars who came in every single day and ordered the same thing without even looking at the menu. Sophie was everywhere at once, taking orders, pouring coffee, clearing plates, running food from the kitchen. Her feet ached. Her lower back throbbed. But she kept moving, kept smiling, kept saying, coming right up, and enjoy your meal, in that bright, fake voice she'd perfected over 2 years. The cook, a heavy-set man named Ramon, shouted from the kitchen. Order up. Table 7. Sophie grabbed the plates, eggs over easy, hash browns, wheat toast, and delivered them to a middle-aged businessman who didn't look up from his phone. Anything else I can get you? She asked. He waved her away without speaking. Sophie gritted her teeth and moved on to the next table. At 9:30, Mr. Dalton arrived. Victor Dalton was a man who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts. 2 wide shoulders, 2 narrow head, small eyes that darted around constantly, looking for something to criticize. He wore expensive suits that didn't quite fit and cologne that smelled like he'd bathed in it. He owned 3 diners in Portland, and Morningside was his problem child, as he liked to say. Never profitable enough. Never clean enough. Staff never worked hard enough. He walked in through the back door, not bothering to greet anyone, and went straight to his office. 10 minutes later, he emerged and stood by the register, arms crossed, watching Sophie like a hawk. She could feel his eyes on her as she refilled coffee mugs, as she wiped down a table, as she rang up a customer's bill. When the morning rush finally slowed around 10:30, Dalton called her over. Sophie. Office. Now. Her stomach dropped. She followed him into the cramped back office, where he sat behind a cluttered desk covered in receipts, invoices, and coffee-stained papers. Close the door, he said. She did. Dalton leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers over his belly. I've been looking at the numbers. Sophie's heart started pounding. Okay, inventory's off. Food costs are higher than they should be. He stared at her. You know anything about that? No, sir. Really? Because I've got 3 muffins unaccounted for yesterday. 2 Danish the day before. Half a pot of coffee on Tuesday. His voice was cold. That adds up, Sophie. That's money out of my pocket. Sophie's mind raced. The muffins she'd given Margaret. The coffee. The Danish she'd slipped to an elderly man last week who looked like he hadn't eaten in days. I might have made a mistake with the log, she stammered. I'll double-check. You'll do more than double-check, Dalton interrupted. I catch you giving away food one more time, you're done. You understand me? I don't care if it's day-old bread or coffee grounds. Nothing leaves this diner without being paid for. Sophie nodded, her throat tight. Yes, sir. Good. Now get back to work. She left the office, her hands shaking. Ramon glanced at her from the kitchen. You okay? Fine, she lied. But she wasn't fine. She needed this job. She couldn't afford to lose it. But she also couldn't stop thinking about Margaret, shivering in the rain, grateful for a cup of coffee. What kind of world is this, Sophie thought bitterly, where feeding a hungry person is a fireable offense? The afternoon dragged. The diner emptied out after lunch, leaving Sophie to wipe tables and refill salt shakers in silence. Her mind was elsewhere, on Danny's medicine, on the rent, on Dalton's threat. At 3 p.m., she took her break. She went out the back door to the alley, where the dumpster sat against the brick wall. The rain had stopped, but the air was cold and damp. Margaret was there. She was sitting on an overturned milk crate, wrapped in a tattered blanket, eating something out of a small container. When she saw Sophie, she smiled. Hey, honey. Hey, Sophie said, sitting down on the concrete steps. You doing okay? Better now, thanks to you. Margaret held up the empty coffee cup. That warmed me right up this morning. Sophie smiled faintly. I'm glad. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Margaret spoke again. You're a good person, Sophie. I can tell. You got a kind heart. Sophie shook her head. I'm just doing what anyone would do. No, Margaret said firmly. Most people walk right past me. They look through me like I'm invisible. But not you. You see me. Sophie didn't know what to say to that. Margaret reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn Bible. My mama gave me this before she passed. She always said, the Lord sees everything. Every kindness. Every cruelty. And he keeps the accounts. Sophie had never been particularly religious, but there was something comforting in Margaret's words. I hope so, Sophie said quietly. Margaret looked at her with sharp, intelligent eyes. You got trouble, don't you? I can see it on your face. Sophie hesitated, then nodded. My brother's sick. I'm trying to get him medicine, but... She trailed off. But money's tight, Margaret finished. Yeah, I know that feeling. How did you? Sophie stopped herself. It felt rude to ask, but Margaret seemed to understand. How'd I end up here? She gave a sad smile. Lost my job. Lost my apartment. Lost my daughter to the foster system because I couldn't take care of her anymore. It happens faster than you think. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, honey. Just keep being kind. That's all any of us can do. Margaret stood up, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I should get going. There's a church a few blocks over that serves soup at 4. Wait, Sophie said. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, part of her tip money from this morning. She held it out to Margaret. Take this. Please. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Sophie, you don't have to. I want to, Sophie insisted. Get yourself something warm to eat. Or save it. Whatever you need. Margaret took the bill with trembling hands. She reached out and squeezed Sophie's hand. You're going to be okay, Margaret said softly. I don't know how I know, but I do. You're going to be just fine. Sophie watched her walk away, disappearing around the corner of the building. She sat there for another minute, staring at the gray sky, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her shoulders. Then she took a deep breath, stood up, and went back inside. That evening, Sophie's shift ended at 6 p.m. She changed out of her uniform, grabbed her jacket, and headed for the pharmacy 6 blocks away. The envelope under her mattress now held $52. She'd added the tips from today, $9 total, minus the $5 she'd given Margaret. Just $23 more, she thought. I can do this. She walked quickly, her breath fogging in the cold air. The pharmacy was in a strip mall next to a laundromat and a dollar store. Sophie had been there so many times in the past year that the pharmacist knew her by name. Hey, Sophie, the woman said as she walked in. Her name was Linda, a round-faced woman in her 50s with kind eyes. How's Danny doing? Not great, Sophie admitted. That's actually why I'm here. I wanted to check on the price of that inhaler again. Linda's expression turned sympathetic. Still 75, hon. I wish I could do something about that, but my hands are tied. Sophie nodded. She'd expected that answer. It's okay. I'm almost there. Just a few more days. You need anything else? Cough syrup? Acetaminophen? No, I'm okay for now. Thanks, Linda. As Sophie turned to leave, Linda called after her. Hey, Sophie. She turned back. You're a good sister, Linda said gently. Danny's lucky to have you. Sophie felt her throat tighten. Thanks, she whispered. She walked home in the dark, her hands shoved in her pockets, her mind calculating and recalculating. If she could get a few more good shifts, if the tips were decent, if nothing else went wrong. When she got home, Danny was on the couch, wrapped in blankets, watching TV with the sound turned low. "Hey," Sophie said, dropping her bag by the door. "How are you feeling?" "Okay," Danny rasped, though he clearly wasn't. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Sophie sat next to him and felt his forehead. "Hot. Did you eat?" she asked. "Yeah. The eggs and rice." "Thanks." "Good." She pulled the blankets tighter around him. "I'll make you some soup in a bit. And I'm close to getting your inhaler. Just hang in there, okay?" Danny nodded, his eyes drifting back to the TV. Sophie went to the kitchen and started heating up a can of chicken noodle soup. As she stirred it on the stove, she felt the exhaustion creeping in, bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when Danny needed her. She brought him the soup, made sure he ate it, gave him his cough syrup, and tucked him into bed. Then she collapsed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, too tired to even cry. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and do it all over again. The next morning, Sophie woke up to the sound of Danny coughing so hard he couldn't catch his breath. She bolted upright on the couch, her heart racing, and rushed to his room. Danny was sitting up in bed, doubled over, his face red, tears streaming down his cheeks as he fought for air. "Danny!" Sophie grabbed his shoulders. "Look at me. Slow breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Come on, you can do it." It took 3 agonizing minutes before his breathing steadied. When it finally did, he slumped back against the pillows, exhausted and pale. "I'm okay," he wheezed. "I'm okay." But he wasn't okay. Sophie could see it. He was getting worse. She grabbed her phone and called the free clinic, but the automated message said the next available appointment was in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Danny might not have 2 weeks. Sophie hung up and sat on the edge of his bed, her mind racing. The inhaler. I need that inhaler. Today. She looked at Danny, who had already fallen back asleep, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Sophie made a decision. She went to her room, pulled the envelope from under her mattress, and counted the money again. $52. She needed 23 more. She grabbed her jacket and left the apartment at 4:30 a.m., an hour earlier than usual. The streets were still dark when Sophie arrived at Morningside Diner. She unlocked the back door and stepped inside, the familiar smell of old coffee and grease greeting her. But this time, instead of starting her usual routine, Sophie stood in the doorway and thought about what she was about to do. Mr. Dalton kept the cash register locked overnight, but she knew where he hid the key. In his office, in the top drawer of his desk, under a stack of invoices. She'd seen him put it there dozens of times. "I'll pay it back," she told herself. "As soon as I get my paycheck on Friday, I'll pay back every cent." She walked to the office, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The door was unlocked. She stepped inside and opened the top drawer. There it was, the small silver key. Her hand hovered over it. "This is stealing," a voice in her head said. "You'll lose your job. You could go to jail." But another voice, louder and more desperate, said, "Danny needs his medicine. He needs it now." Sophie grabbed the key. She walked back to the register, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key into the lock. When it finally clicked open, she stared down at the cash inside, 20s, 10s, 5s, 1s. She counted out $23. Exactly what she needed. No more, no less. She closed the register, locked it, and returned the key to Dalton's office. Then she shoved the money in her pocket and went to work, her stomach churning with guilt and fear. The morning passed in a blur. Sophie went through the motions, coffee, orders, plates, smiles, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. What if he notices? What if he counts the register and realizes money is missing? At 9:30, Dalton arrived. Sophie's heart stopped. He walked in, glanced around the diner, and went straight to his office without a word. Sophie kept working, but every sound from that office made her jump. Every footstep. Every drawer opening. At 10:15, Dalton came out. He didn't look at her. He just poured himself a coffee, made a phone call on his cell, and left. Sophie exhaled for the first time in an hour. He didn't notice. At 2 p.m., Sophie took her break. She clocked out, told Ramon she'd be back in 30 minutes, and ran to the pharmacy. Linda looked up when she walked in. "Sophie? Twice in 2 days." "I have the money," Sophie said breathlessly. She pulled out the envelope, $52 she'd saved, plus the 23 she'd taken from the register. $75 exactly. Linda smiled. All right, let me get that for you. 5 minutes later, Sophie was holding the small box containing Danny's inhaler. Relief washed over her so strongly she almost cried right there in the pharmacy. Thank you, she whispered. Take care of that boy, Linda said warmly. Sophie ran all the way home. Danny was on the couch, breathing in short, labored gasps, his eyes half closed. Danny, look. Sophie tore open the box, pulled out the inhaler, and shook it. Here, use this. It's going to help. She showed him how to use it. Press down, breathe in, hold. And within seconds, his breathing started to ease. The relief on his face was immediate. Color returned to his cheeks. His chest stopped heaving. Better? Sophie asked. Danny nodded, his eyes filling with tears. Yeah, so much better. Sophie hugged him tightly, her own tears falling now. You're going to be okay. I promise. She stayed with him for 20 minutes, making sure he used the inhaler correctly, making sure he ate something, making sure he knew she loved him. Then she ran back to the diner, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. But when she walked through the back door, Ramon grabbed her arm. Sophie, don't go out there, he said urgently. What? Why? Dalton's in a rage. He's been shouting for the last 10 minutes. Something about the register being short. Sophie's blood turned to ice. How much? She whispered. $23. Her knees almost gave out. Ramon looked at her closely. Sophie, did you? I was going to pay it back, she said quickly, her voice shaking. On Friday, when I get paid. My brother needed medicine. I didn't have a choice. Ramon's face softened with sympathy, but he shook his head. Sophie, Dalton doesn't care about reasons. He's going to fire you. Or worse, call the cops. What do I do? I don't know, kid. But you better think of something fast. Sophie took a deep breath and walked into the main dining area. Dalton was standing by the register, his face red, his jaw clenched. When he saw her, he pointed a finger at her like a weapon. You. Office. Now. Sophie followed him, her legs shaking. Dalton slammed the door behind them and spun around. You want to explain to me why the register is short $23? Sophie opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I've got cameras, Sophie, Dalton said, his voice dangerously calm now. I've got footage of you opening that register this morning before anyone else was here. I've got you on video taking money out of my drawer. Sophie felt the world tilt. I was going to pay it back. I don't care. Dalton roared. You stole from me. Do you understand what that means? I could have you arrested right now. Please, Sophie begged, tears streaming down her face. Please, Mr. Dalton. My brother is 16. He has asthma. He couldn't breathe. He needed an inhaler, and I didn't have enough money, and I swear to God I was going to pay you back on Friday. Everyone's got a sob story, Sophie, Dalton interrupted coldly. You think you're special? You think your problems give you the right to steal from me? I'll work for free. I'll do extra shifts. You're fired. Sophie felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. No. Please. I need this job. I have rent. I have bills. My brother. Should have thought about that before you stuck your hand in my register. Dalton opened the door. Get your things and get out. And consider yourself lucky I'm not calling the police. Sophie stood there, frozen, unable to process what was happening. Now! Dalton shouted. She stumbled out of the office, grabbed her jacket from the back room, and walked out the back door in a daze. Ramon caught up with her in the alley. Sophie, I'm so sorry. She couldn't even look at him. She just walked away, her vision blurred with tears, her whole world collapsing around her. She wandered the streets for an hour, not knowing where to go or what to do. No job. No income. Rent due in 3 days. Bills piling up. She ended up back in the alley behind the diner, sitting on the concrete steps, her head in her hands. Sophie. She looked up. Margaret was standing there, holding her usual garbage bag, her face full of concern. What happened, honey? Sophie told her everything. The money. The inhaler. Getting fired. Margaret sat down beside her and put an arm around her shoulders. You did the right thing, Margaret said quietly. You took care of your brother. That's what matters. But now we're going to lose our apartment, Sophie sobbed. We're going to end up on the street. Just like. She stopped herself, but Margaret nodded. Just like me, Margaret finished. Yeah, I know. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Margaret spoke again, her voice thoughtful. Sophie, can I tell you something? Okay. I've been watching this place for a few weeks now. Watching the diner. Sophie looked at her, confused. Why? Margaret's expression turned serious. Because I used to be a cop. 23 years on the force before I lost everything. And my instincts are still sharp. Sophie blinked. You were a cop? Detective, actually. Margaret reached into her coat and pulled out a tarnished badge, the metal scratched and worn, but still visible, Portland Police Department. Sophie stared at it. I don't understand. There's something wrong with this place, Sophie. I've seen men coming and going late at night. Men who don't look like they're here for breakfast. I've seen your boss meeting with people in the alley, handing over packages. Sophie's mind raced. Packages? Margaret nodded. I think Victor Dalton is into something illegal. And I think you might have just gotten fired because you saw something you weren't supposed to see. But I didn't see anything, Sophie protested. I just took money from the register. Are you sure? Margaret asked. Think, Sophie. Have you noticed anything strange in the past few weeks? Anything out of place? Sophie thought back. And then she remembered. 3 days ago, she'd gone down to the basement storage to get supplies. The basement was cluttered and dark, full of old boxes and equipment. While she was moving a stack of boxes, she'd noticed something behind them. A duffel bag. Black. Heavy-looking. Partially unzipped. And inside, she'd glimpsed something that looked like bricks wrapped in plastic. At the time, she'd thought it was strange, but she'd been too busy and too tired to think much about it. Now her stomach dropped. There was a bag, she said slowly. In the basement. I saw it a few days ago. Margaret's eyes sharpened. What kind of bag? Black. Like a gym bag. It had packages inside. Wrapped in plastic. Margaret stood up, suddenly energized. Sophie, listen to me very carefully. I think your boss is using this diner to move drugs. And if he saw you near that bag, if he thinks you might talk. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. He couldn't. He fired you today, Margaret said. Why? You took $23. That's nothing. Most bosses would dock your pay or give you a warning. But he fired you immediately. Why? Sophie's hands started shaking again. Because he wants me gone, she whispered. Before I figure it out. Margaret nodded grimly. And if that's true, Sophie, you might be in real danger. Sophie's mind was racing. She couldn't breathe. The alley suddenly felt too small, too dark, too dangerous. What do I do? She whispered. What am I supposed to do? Margaret placed both hands on Sophie's shoulders, forcing her to make eye contact. First, you calm down. Panic won't help you. Second, you trust me. Can you do that? Sophie looked into Margaret's eyes, clear, sharp, sober. This wasn't the frail, homeless woman she'd been feeding for months. This was someone else entirely. Someone with authority. Someone who knew what she was doing. Yes, Sophie said. I trust you. Good. Margaret pulled out an old flip phone from her coat pocket. I need you to tell me everything. Every detail about that bag. Where exactly it was. What you saw. Who was around. Everything. Sophie told her. The basement. The corner behind the old freezer. The black duffel bag with the plastic-wrapped bricks inside. How she'd only seen it for a second before hearing footsteps and quickly moving away. And who came down after you? Margaret asked. Sophie thought back. Dalton. He came down maybe 2 minutes later. He asked me what I was doing down there. I told him I was getting napkins. He just stared at me. Then he told me to get back upstairs. Margaret nodded slowly. He saw you. He knew you were near that bag. That's why he's been watching you. And when you took that money today, it gave him the perfect excuse to get rid of you. But why fire me? Sophie asked. If he wanted me gone, why not just? She stopped, the horrifying implication hitting her. Why not just kill you? Margaret finished. Because it would be too obvious. You disappear right after discovering his stash? The cops would investigate. But if you get fired for stealing? You're just another employee with a grudge. No one looks too closely. Sophie felt sick. But I didn't steal to hurt him. I didn't even care about that bag. I just needed medicine for Danny. I know that. You know that. But Dalton doesn't know what you know, or what you might tell someone. Margaret started pacing. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make some calls. People I used to work with. People who still trust me, even after everything. Will they believe you? Sophie asked. I mean, you're homeless. Margaret smiled sadly. Yeah, that's the problem. I lost my badge, my pension, my credibility. All because I couldn't handle my daughter's death, and I crawled into a bottle. But I've been sober for 4 months now. And I still have a few friends on the force who remember the detective I used to be. She dialed a number and held the phone to her ear. Jimmy? It's Margaret Reeves. Yeah, I know it's been a while. Listen, I need a favor. There's a diner on 5th and Hawthorne. Morningside Diner. Owner's name is Victor Dalton. I think he's running a drug operation out of the basement. No, I'm not using. Jimmy, I'm serious. I've been watching this place for weeks. There's a girl, a witness. She saw the stash. Yeah, she's with me now. Okay, thank you. Margaret hung up and looked at Sophie. He's sending someone. A detective I worked with 10 years ago. He's going to meet us at the coffee shop on 7th Street in 20 minutes. What do I tell him? Sophie asked, her voice shaking. The truth. Everything you saw. Everything you know. Margaret squeezed her hand. And Sophie, this is going to work out. I promise you. 20 minutes later, Sophie was sitting in a corner booth at a small coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. Margaret sat across from her, watching the door. A man walked in. Mid-40s, graying hair, wearing a rumpled suit and a tired expression. He scanned the room, saw Margaret, and his face registered shock. Maggie, he said, walking over. Jesus, Maggie, is that really you? Hey, Jimmy. Margaret stood up and hugged him briefly. Thanks for coming. Detective James Brennan sat down, his eyes moving between Margaret and Sophie. Okay, talk to me. What's going on? Sophie told him everything. The bag in the basement. Dalton's behavior. Getting fired. Margaret's suspicions. Brennan listened carefully, taking notes on a small pad. When she finished, he leaned back and sighed. All right, here's the situation. We've had Victor Dalton on our radar for about 6 months. We think he's connected to a distribution network, but we haven't been able to prove it. If what you're telling me is true, if there's product in that basement, we can move on this. What do you need from me? Sophie asked. Honestly? Nothing right now. You're a civilian. You've given us the tip. That's enough. He looked at Margaret. Maggie, how solid is this? Very solid, Margaret said. I've been watching that place for 2 months. I've seen the late-night meetings. The deliveries. The money changing hands. Dalton's dirty, Jimmy. I'd bet my life on it. Brennan studied her for a long moment. You look good, Maggie. Sober? For months. He nodded approvingly. Good for you. He turned back to Sophie. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to get a warrant for the diner. We'll execute it tomorrow morning early. If we find what you say is there, Dalton goes down. But I need you to stay away from that place. Don't go back. Don't contact him. Don't do anything that might tip him off. I'm already fired, Sophie said. I don't have any reason to go back. Good. Keep it that way. Brennan stood up and handed her his card. If anything happens, if Dalton contacts you, if you see anything suspicious, you call me immediately. Understand? Sophie took the card. Okay. Brennan looked at Margaret again. You did good, Maggie. Really good. Margaret gave a small smile. Just trying to make things right. After Brennan left, Sophie and Margaret sat in silence for a moment. What happens now? Sophie asked. Now. Margaret stood up. Now you go home. Take care of your brother. And tomorrow morning, you let the police do their job. What about you? Margaret pulled her coat tighter. I'll be around. Margaret, wait. Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out the last $10 she had. Please. Take this. Get a hot meal. Get a room somewhere. Margaret looked at the money, then at Sophie, and shook her head. Keep it, honey. You need it more than I do. But, Sophie, you've already given me more than you know. You treated me like a human being when no one else would. That's worth more than any amount of money. She touched Sophie's cheek gently. You're going to be okay. I promise. And then she walked out into the rainy Portland night. Sophie went home in a daze. Danny was feeling better, using his inhaler regularly, his breathing steady and clear. He didn't know about the job. He didn't know about any of it. Sophie decided not to tell him. Not yet. Not until this was over. That night, she barely slept. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside. Sirens, traffic, the distant rumble of a train. She kept thinking about Margaret, about the detective she used to be, about how someone could fall so far and still have the strength to climb back up. At 5:30 a.m., Sophie's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It's Brennan. We're moving in now. Stay home. We'll update you soon. Sophie sat up, her heart pounding. She turned on the TV and flipped to the local news, but there was nothing yet. An hour passed. Then another. At 7:45 a.m., her phone rang. "Sophie, it's Detective Brennan. We got him." Sophie felt her knees go weak with relief. "You found it." "We found it. 50 kilos of heroin. Another 20 kilos of cocaine. Cash. Weapons. Dalton's in custody. So are 3 of his associates." Brennan paused. "Sophie, you and Margaret saved lives today. That much product on the streets? People would have died." Sophie couldn't speak. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face. "We're going to need you to come in and give an official statement later today. Can you do that?" "Yes," Sophie managed. "Yes, of course." "Good. I'll text you the address. And Sophie, you're safe now. Dalton's not getting out anytime soon." After they hung up, Sophie sat on the couch and cried. From relief, from exhaustion, from everything. Danny came out of his room, looking concerned. "Sophie, what's wrong?" She wiped her eyes and smiled. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's going to be okay." That afternoon, Sophie went to the police station and gave her statement. She told them everything, every detail, every moment. When she was finished, Brennan walked her out. "Listen, Sophie. Because of your cooperation, you're entitled to a reward. The federal government has a program for civilians who help bust drug operations. You're looking at somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000. Sophie stared at him. "What?" "It takes a few months to process, but yeah, you'll get a check. $25,000. Rent. Bills. Medicine. Food. A cushion. A chance." "Thank you," Sophie whispered. Brennan smiled. "Thank Margaret. She's the one who brought this to us." "Where is she?" Sophie asked. "I've been looking for her. I need to thank her." Brennan's expression grew serious. "She didn't tell you?" "Tell me what?" He sighed. "Margaret's dying, Sophie. Liver cancer. Stage 4. She's got maybe 3 months left." Sophie felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. "No," she whispered. "No, she can't." "She knew," Brennan said gently. "She's known for a while. That's why she stopped drinking. That's why she wanted to do one last good thing before she goes." Sophie covered her mouth with her hand, trying not to sob. "Where is she?" she asked. "Providence Hospital. 4th floor, room 412. Sophie ran. She ran out of the police station, down the street, through the rain, all the way to Providence Hospital. She took the elevator to the 4th floor, found room 412, and pushed open the door. Margaret was lying in the hospital bed, looking small and frail, hooked up to an 4. But when she saw Sophie, her face lit up. "Hey, honey," Margaret said softly. Sophie rushed to her side and took her hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it didn't matter," Margaret said simply. "What mattered was helping you, making sure you were safe." "But you're dying." "Yeah, I know." Margaret smiled sadly. "I've made my peace with it. I got to do one more good thing. I got to save someone. That's more than most people get." Sophie sat down in the chair beside the bed, holding Margaret's hand tightly. "You saved my life," Sophie whispered. "No, honey. You saved mine first." Margaret squeezed her hand. "You fed me. You talked to me. You reminded me that I was still human. Still worth something. You gave me a reason to get sober. A reason to care again." They sat together in silence, the only sound the steady beep of the heart monitor. "What can I do?" Sophie asked. "How can I help you?" Margaret thought for a moment. "Tell me about your brother. Tell me about Danny." So Sophie did. She told Margaret about Danny's asthma, his sense of humor, his dreams of becoming a teacher. She told her about their mother, about the struggles, about the hope. Margaret listened, her eyes closed, a peaceful expression on her face. "You're a good sister," she said finally. "He's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have met you," Sophie said. Margaret opened her eyes and looked at her. "Sophie, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll keep being kind. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs you something. Because kindness, it comes back. Maybe not right away. Maybe not in the way you expect. But it always comes back." Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise." Margaret passed away 3 weeks later. Sophie was there, holding her hand when it happened. It was peaceful. Margaret simply closed her eyes, took one last breath, and was gone. The funeral was small. Detective Brennan came, along with 2 other former colleagues from Margaret's police days. Sophie was there with Danny, who had insisted on coming despite still recovering. And there was one other person, a woman in her 30s with Margaret's eyes and her strong jawline. After the service, she approached Sophie. "You're Sophie, aren't you?" the woman said. "My mother talked about you. On the phone near the end." Sophie felt her throat tighten. "You're her daughter?" The woman nodded. "Rebecca. I didn't know she was homeless. I didn't know she was sick. We hadn't spoken in almost 5 years." Tears filled her eyes. "I was so angry at her for so long. For the drinking. For missing my wedding. For not being there when I needed her. And now she's gone, and I never got to tell her I forgave her." Sophie reached out and took Rebecca's hand. She knew. I promise you she knew. And she was so proud of you. She told me. It was a small lie, but a kind one. Rebecca squeezed her hand. "Thank you for being there for her. Detective Brennan told me what you did. How you fed her. How you treated her with dignity." She paused. "My mother was a hero once. Before everything fell apart. And at the end, she got to be a hero again. Because of you." After the funeral, Sophie and Danny stood by Margaret's grave for a long time. "She was brave," Danny said quietly. "Yeah," Sophie agreed. "She really was." The reward money came through 6 weeks later. $22,000. Sophie stared at the check for a full 5 minutes, unable to believe it was real. The first thing she did was pay off all their debts, rent, utilities, medical bills. Everything. The second thing she did was set up a savings account for Danny's future. College. Or whatever he wanted to do. The third thing she did surprised even herself. She went to the city housing office and asked about programs for homeless veterans. "I want to make a donation," Sophie told the woman at the desk. "In memory of someone." Her name was Margaret Reeves. She was a police detective and a veterans advocate before she fell on hard times. The woman's expression softened. "That's very generous. How much were you thinking?" Sophie thought about it. About Margaret sleeping in alleys. About the cold nights and the hunger and the loneliness. $5,000, Sophie said. "I want it to go specifically to housing programs for women veterans." "We can definitely do that. And we'll make sure her name is on a plaque in our memorial garden." Sophie filled out the paperwork, wrote the check, and walked out feeling lighter than she had in months. Finding a new job wasn't easy. Sophie applied everywhere: restaurants, stores, offices, warehouses. But every application asked the same question. "Have you ever been terminated from a position?" She couldn't lie. And when she checked, yes, no one called her back. After 2 weeks of rejection, Sophie was sitting on a bench in the park, feeling defeated, when her phone rang. It was Detective Brennan. "Sophie, I've got something for you. A friend of mine owns a small bistro downtown. He's looking for a manager. I told him about you, about everything you've been through, everything you did. He wants to meet you." "A manager?" Sophie said, stunned. "But I've only ever been a waitress." "He says that's exactly what he needs. Someone who knows the work from the ground up. Someone honest. Someone who cares." Brennan paused. "His name is Thomas Chin. Here's his number. Call him today." Sophie called immediately. Thomas Chin had a warm, friendly voice. "Sophie, Detective Brennan tells me you're someone I should meet. Can you come by tomorrow morning? 10 o'clock. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. Let's see if we're a good fit first." The Blue Lotus Bistro was nothing like Morningside Diner. It was bright and clean, with plants in the windows, local art on the walls, and a menu featuring organic, locally sourced food. The kind of place Sophie had always dreamed of working, but never thought would hire someone like her. Thomas Chun was a man in his 60s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that showed he'd worked in kitchens his whole life. Sit, he said, gesturing to a table. He brought her tea without asking. "Detective Brennan told me what happened. That you lost your job trying to help your brother. That you helped take down a drug ring. That you treated a homeless woman with dignity when no one else would." Sophie didn't know what to say. "I need someone honest," Thomas continued. "Someone who understands that this business is about more than profit. It's about community. About feeding people. About creating a space where everyone feels welcome." He looked at her closely. "I think you understand that. Am I right?" "Yes," Sophie said. "I do. The position is restaurant manager. You'd oversee the front of house, handle scheduling, train staff, work with me on menu development. Starting salary is $45,000 a year, plus benefits. Health insurance. Paid time off. Retirement plan." Sophie felt dizzy. $45,000? She'd been making $22,000 at Morningside. I don't have experience managing," she admitted. You have something better. You have heart. I can teach you the rest. Thomas extended his hand. What do you say? Sophie shook his hand, tears in her eyes. Yes. Thank you. I won't let you down. I know you won't. The first few months were hard. Learning to manage staff, handle inventory, deal with difficult customers. It was overwhelming. Sophie made mistakes. She second-guessed herself constantly. But Thomas was patient. He taught her everything he knew, shared his 40 years of restaurant wisdom, and trusted her to grow into the role. And slowly she did. Sophie discovered she was good at this. She had a knack for creating a welcoming atmosphere, for remembering regulars' names and orders, for making people feel seen and cared for. The Blue Lotus thrived. Danny's health improved dramatically. With good insurance, he was able to see a specialist who adjusted his medications and taught him better asthma management. He started playing basketball again. His grades improved. He smiled more. 6 months after starting at the Blue Lotus, Sophie was closing up one evening when she noticed someone standing outside the window, looking in. An older man, maybe in his 70s, wearing a worn coat and carrying a backpack. Sophie felt her heart clench. She went to the door and opened it. Sir? Can I help you? The man looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother you. It looked warm inside. Are you hungry? Sophie asked. The man hesitated, then nodded. Sophie held the door open. Come in. Please. She sat him at a table, brought him a full meal, soup, bread, a main course, dessert, coffee, and refused to let him pay. It's on the house, she said. The man's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. You don't know what this means. I do, actually, Sophie said softly. I had someone do the same for me once. After he left, Thomas came out of the kitchen and stood beside Sophie. That was kind of you, he said. I learned from the best, Sophie replied. Thomas smiled. I've been thinking. I'm getting old. My kids have no interest in running this place. I need to start thinking about succession planning. Sophie looked at him, confused. Succession planning? I want you to consider becoming a partner, Sophie. An ownership stake in the Blue Lotus. We'd work out the details, but I think you've earned it. Sophie couldn't speak. She just stared at him. Think about it, Thomas said gently. No pressure. But I believe in you. 1 year after Margaret's death, Sophie stood in the memorial garden at the housing office. There it was, a small bronze plaque among dozens of others. In memory of Detective Margaret Reeves, Portland Police Department, kindness always comes back. Sophie placed flowers beneath it and sat on a nearby bench. She thought about everything that had happened. The desperation, the fear, the moment she'd stolen that money, the moment Margaret had warned her, the moment everything had changed. She pulled out her phone and opened her photos. There was one picture she'd taken, Margaret in her hospital bed, smiling, giving a thumbs up. I kept my promise, Sophie whispered. I'm still being kind, even when it's hard. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead. Sophie felt, somehow, that Margaret had heard her. 2 years later, Sophie became a full partner in the Blue Lotus. She and Thomas opened a second location, then a third. Each one operated on the same principle: good food, fair prices, and compassion for everyone who walked through the door. Every location had a policy. Anyone who was hungry and couldn't pay was fed. No questions asked. No judgment. Danny graduated high school with honors and got a full scholarship to Portland State University. He wanted to become a social worker, to help people the way Sophie had been helped. Sophie met someone, a teacher named Marcus, who came into the bistro every Tuesday for lunch. They started talking, then dating, then building a life together. But she never forgot. Every year, on the anniversary of Margaret's death, Sophie volunteered at the homeless shelter. She served meals. She listened to stories. She treated every person with the dignity and respect that Margaret had taught her. And once a month, she visited schools and community centers to tell her story. Not to brag or seek praise, but to remind people of something important. Kindness matters. It might not seem like much in the moment, a cup of coffee, a muffin, a conversation, a smile. But you never know whose life you might save. You never know what chain of events you might set in motion. You never know when the person you help might be the very person who saves you in return. 5 years after everything happened, Sophie stood at a podium in front of 200 people at a community center. She'd been invited to speak about resilience, about overcoming adversity, about building a life from nothing. But Sophie knew the real story wasn't about her. I want to tell you about a woman named Margaret, she began. She was a police detective who lost everything: her career, her family, her home. She ended up living in an alley, forgotten by the world. The audience was silent, listening. I started bringing her food. Not because I had much to give, but because I couldn't walk past her without doing something. And then one day, she saved my life. Sophie told them the whole story. The diner, the drug operation, the warning, the aftermath. Margaret taught me that we're all connected, Sophie said. That our small acts of kindness create ripples we can't even imagine. She was dying, and she had nothing, but she still found a way to give everything. She paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. So I'm asking you, all of you, to do one thing. Look around. See the people who are invisible. The ones everyone walks past. The ones society has forgotten. And do something. Buy them a meal. Give them a coat. Talk to them like they're human. Because they are. Her voice grew stronger. You don't need money. You don't need resources. You just need to see people. Really see them. And treat them with the kindness you'd want if you were in their place. The audience erupted in applause. After the speech, dozens of people came up to talk to Sophie. To share their own stories. To promise they'd do better. One young woman, probably 19 or 20, waited until everyone else had left. Thank you, she said quietly. I'm actually homeless right now. I've been sleeping in my car. And hearing your story, it gave me hope that things can get better. Sophie took her hand. What's your name? Emily. Emily, I want you to come by the Blue Lotus tomorrow morning. Ask for me. We're hiring, and I think you'd be perfect for the position. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? Everyone deserves a chance. After Emily left, Sophie stood alone in the empty auditorium. She thought about Margaret, about the chain of kindness that had started with a cup of coffee and 2 muffins. She thought about all the lives that had been touched since then. Hers, Danny's, Rebecca's, Thomas's, Marcus's, Emily's, and countless others. And she understood, finally, what Margaret had been trying to tell her. Kindness isn't just about the person you help. It's about creating a world where helping each other is the norm, not the exception. It's about planting seeds that will grow long after you're gone. It's about remembering that we're all one bad day, one crisis, one tragedy away from needing help ourselves. Sophie smiled. Thank you, Margaret, she whispered into the empty room. For everything. So, did this story touch your heart? Did it remind you of someone in your life who showed you kindness when you needed it most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Let's see how far across the world this story has traveled. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button. It helps me reach more people with stories that matter, stories about hope, resilience, and the power of human kindness. You can also support me through super thanks if you'd like. Every bit helps me continue creating these stories for you. And before you go, I've got 2 more powerful stories waiting for you on the screen. Click on one now, and let's spend more time together. These stories are meant to be shared, to remind us all of what really matters in life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, your small act of kindness today might just save someone's life tomorrow. Much love. See you in the next story.